He thought he knew his son, until a stranger showed up at the funeral holding a baby, and the truth he never saw coming. He didn't want to be there, not really, but Grant Ellison had learned a long time ago that grief wasn't about what you wanted, it was about what needed to be done. So he came. It was a cold Wednesday morning in Toledo, Ohio. The sky hung low and heavy, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or just sit there and sulk with everyone else. The cemetery was still. Not peaceful, just still. Rows of headstones stretched across the frozen ground like silent judges. Grant pulled up in a black Escalade, windows tinted, engine purring low, as if it too was trying not to disturb the dead. He stepped out, wrapped in an expensive wool overcoat, scarf neat around his neck, shoes polished like he had a board meeting after this. He didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't speak, didn't even sit with the family, just stood in the back with his hands in his pockets and eyes locked on the casket. Now, 4 days later, he came back alone to do what he couldn't do then, say goodbye. But someone beat him to it. At a distance, he saw a woman kneeling by the grave. At first, he thought maybe she was one of Marcus's friends from college, or maybe someone from the nonprofit his son had been working with before he died. Grant didn't recognize her. She wasn't dressed for the weather, no coat, just a red diner uniform, one of those with a name tag that probably read, "Hi, my name is..." But he couldn't see it from here. Her shoes looked thin, and in her arms, he squinted, a baby, small, wrapped in a worn blanket with little blue elephants printed on it. The woman was rocking the baby gently, like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Her head was bowed, her lips moved. Was she praying? Talking to Marcus? Grant's breath tightened. Who the hell was this? He took a few steps forward, his boots crunching through the dry grass. She didn't hear him at first. She was completely locked into whatever moment she was having at his son's grave. But when he got close enough, her head turned, slowly. They locked eyes. She stood quickly, instinctively shifting the baby to one side of her hip, like she was preparing to shield him. Grant stopped a few feet away, close enough now to see the streaks of dried tears on her face. Young, mid to late 20s maybe, brown skin, tired eyes. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. The wind pushed past them, carrying nothing but tension. Then Grant spoke. "Who are you?" Her jaw clenched, just a little. "I didn't mean to intrude. You didn't answer my question." "I know." The baby let out a soft coo and buried his face in her shoulder. Grant stared at the child. "Is that yours?" She hesitated, then nodded. He took a step forward. "You knew Marcus?" Her lips tightened. She looked down at the grave for a long second, then back at Grant. "I loved him." It was like someone had jabbed a finger into Grant's chest. He blinked slowly. "Excuse me?" "I loved your son," she said again, this time without flinching. "And he loved me." Grant felt something shift under his feet, like the ground wasn't so solid anymore. His face stayed still, stone, but his fingers curled slightly inside his gloves. He looked at the baby again. The child had Marcus's nose, that small curve at the tip, that same soft chin. It wasn't just in his head, it was there. Everything felt tight all of a sudden. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't know what this was. Why are you here?" he asked. She looked right at him. "Because I never got to say goodbye." But she wasn't the only one, and what she was about to say next would tear open everything Grant thought he knew about his son. Grant took another step forward, but this time slower. Like he was approaching something fragile he didn't quite trust. He looked at her again. No makeup, no jewelry, just a small crack in her voice that told him she hadn't slept properly in days, maybe longer. "You said you loved him." She nodded. "And you're telling me this now? At his grave?" Her eyes stayed locked on his. "Where else would you have listened?" That landed harder than she probably intended, but Grant didn't show it. "You could have reached out," he said flatly. "Marcus never mentioned you." Her expression changed, just for a second. Hurt. Then she covered it. "He was going to, but your relationship with him made that complicated." He flinched at that, because deep down, he knew she was right. Marcus hadn't called him in almost 3 months, And even when he did, it was short, polite, empty. The boy who used to spend Sundays tagging along to project sights had slowly become a stranger. Now this woman, this waitress, was telling him Marcus had built a whole life she was a part of. Grant's voice sharpened. "You said he loved you. You expect me to believe that?" She didn't flinch. "I don't need you to believe it. I'm not here for you." She adjusted the baby on her hip. "I came to say goodbye. I didn't know you'd be here." He pointed to the child. "What's his name?" "Calvin." Grant swallowed, but it felt like trying to push glass down his throat. "That's my grandfather's name." She nodded. "Marcus picked it." The wind cut between them again. Grant stared at the baby, at Calvin. His grandson? No, it couldn't be. This woman could be making all of it up. But deep down, he didn't believe that. He looked too much like Marcus. How old is he? 10 weeks. He did the math. His jaw stiffened. That lined up exactly. Marcus had been driving home late from some out-of-town trip when the crash happened. No drugs, no alcohol, just slick roads and bad luck. He never said why he was traveling. Now Grant wondered if it was to see her. Maybe he was coming home to his family. The silence stretched too long. Janelle looked away first. "You think I'm lying?" "I don't know what I think," Grant admitted. "You came out of nowhere." "Marcus didn't want me to be part of that world," she said. "Your world." He raised an eyebrow. "And what world is that?" She gave him a long look. "One where people like me don't belong." That stung. Even more because she didn't say it like an insult, just a fact. "You don't know me," he said, his voice low now. "You don't know what I would have done if Marcus had brought you home." She gave a small, tired laugh. "He knew. That's why he didn't." Ouch. But she didn't say it with bitterness. There was no fire behind her voice, just sadness. Grant's shoulders dropped slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him look small in front of her. "So, what now?" he asked. "You've said goodbye. Are you expecting something from me?" Janelle straightened her back, even though she looked like she could barely hold herself up. "No," she said simply. "I'm not asking for anything. I wanted to bring Calvin here, so he'd know his father, even if just for a moment." Her voice cracked on that last sentence. And just like that, the wall between them began to crumble. Because Grant, despite all the money, power, and armor he wore every day, knew what it felt like to want a second chance with someone who was already gone. He looked down at the grave. The stone was still clean, fresh. His son's name carved neatly into the granite. Marcus Elijah Ellison, 1993, 2025. Beloved son, dreamer, light of our lives. He hadn't even written father on the stone, because he didn't know. "You should have told me sooner," Grant whispered. "I couldn't," Janelle replied. "I was scared. I didn't think you'd care." Grant didn't respond, because she wasn't wrong. But care was creeping in, slowly, stubbornly, and it was about to challenge everything Grant believed about himself. They stood there for a moment, saying nothing. Only the cold wind dared to move. Calvin shifted in Janelle's arms, his tiny fist tightening around the edge of her uniform. She rocked him gently, eyes flicking back to the headstone. "He used to talk to him," she said quietly. Grant's head tilted. "What do you mean?" "While I was pregnant," she answered, smiling faintly at the memory. "He'd put his mouth near my belly and talk to him like he was already here. He said he didn't want his son to hear his voice for the first time from a stranger." Grant looked down, unsure how to respond. Marcus never shared any of this, not with him, not with anyone in the family. "I thought Marcus was living in Pittsburgh," Grant said, his voice low. "He was," she nodded. "Sort of. That was just his mailing address. He was staying with me in Bowling Green most nights, said he wanted peace, said your world was too loud." Grant clenched his jaw. That world paid for his education, his cars, everything. And still, it suffocated him, she said, not angry, just honest. He shot her a look, but she didn't back down. "He didn't hate you, Mr. Ellison," she added. "He just didn't know how to breathe around you." That landed like a slap. He looked away, blinking hard. "I was hard on him," he admitted, "but I wanted him to be prepared. This world doesn't care about dreamers. I gave him the tools to survive. Janelle adjusted Calvin and sat down on the stone bench near the grave. He didn't want to survive. He wanted to live. The baby stirred and started to whimper. She gently reached into her diaper bag and pulled out a small bottle, warming it in her hands. Her movements were tired but practiced, like she'd been doing this without help for a while. "I knew him for a year," she said, without looking up. It wasn't long, but it was enough. Grant stayed standing, arms folded. "He didn't tell me about you. Why?" She took a deep breath. "He said he didn't want to fight. He didn't want to defend why he loved me, or explain why he didn't want to take over the company. He said every conversation with you was like sitting in a courtroom, and he was always on trial." That silenced Grant completely. Because he had treated Marcus that way. Every dinner, every phone call, every tense silence. He could hear it now. All those times he'd pushed for answers, for structure, for results, never asking if his son was happy. "I thought I was helping him," Grant said, almost to himself. "I know," she nodded. And he knew too. That's what made it harder. He walked over slowly and sat on the far edge of the bench, leaving a wide gap between them. He stared at the grave. "Did he want to keep the baby?" he asked. She glanced over at him. Yes, it scared him, but he wanted it. He said he didn't want to make the same mistakes. Grant stiffened. "What mistakes?" He said he grew up learning how to earn respect, not how to feel safe. She replied, her tone gentle. "He wanted Calvin to have both." Grant stared ahead. "He never told me he was afraid of me." "He wasn't afraid of you," she said. "He just never felt seen by you." The bottle was warm enough now. She held it to Calvin's lips, and he latched on quietly. "He used to sing to him at night," she continued. "Little made-up songs. Silly stuff. He wasn't perfect, Mr. Ellison, but he was trying." Grant wiped his hand across his face, not tears, just weariness. That's what he told himself. "How do I know this baby is mine?" he asked. "I mean, his." Janelle reached into the bag again, pulled out a small manila envelope. "I brought this," she said. "Photos, screenshots, messages. If you want to test, I'm fine with that too." He took the envelope but didn't open it. He just held it in his lap, staring at the grave. "I thought I knew him," he whispered. "You knew parts of him," she replied. "The parts he thought you'd approve of." That hit harder than he expected. He let out a shaky breath. "I was planning to move to Minneapolis with him," she said suddenly. "He got a little job offer, nothing big, but it was enough. We had an apartment lined up. He was going to tell you after the baby was born. He wanted things to settle first." Grant shook his head slowly. "He was building a life, and I wasn't in it." "No," she said softly, "but now you could be." But first, he'd have to decide whether he was ready to face who his son really was, and who he had become without even realizing it. The bottle was nearly empty. Calvin let out a tiny sigh, milk dribbling from the corner of his mouth. Janelle wiped it gently with a cloth from her bag, then cradled him back against her chest. "He's got his eyes," Grant said, barely above a whisper. Janelle nodded. "And his stubbornness." Grant cracked something close to a smile, but it faded quickly. "Why didn't Marcus tell me? About the baby? About you? About any of this?" he asked, his voice tight. "He wanted to," she said, "but he kept putting it off. Said he needed the right moment. Said you always had a way of turning things upside down before he could finish a sentence." Grant looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly, so he clasped them together. "I wasn't a kind man. Not to him." Janelle didn't respond. Not right away. She just rocked Calvin gently. "He never called you cruel," she finally said. "Just loud. And he was quiet. That's a hard combination." Grant closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered teaching Marcus how to ride a bike, pushing him down the driveway, yelling instructions like a coach. He thought it was motivating. Maybe it was just too much. He reached down and opened the envelope she'd given him earlier. Inside were a few photos. Marcus holding her hand in a diner booth, her belly showing beneath a green hoodie. A selfie of them in what looked like a hospital room, Marcus's face beaming with pride. One blurry photo of Marcus holding Calvin for the first time. He looked overwhelmed, awestruck. There were also printed screenshots, texts from Marcus. A message where he'd written, "He kicked tonight. Think he's going to be a soccer player." Another one, "I'm scared, Jay, but I've never wanted anything more than this." Grant's throat tightened. He closed the envelope slowly, careful not to crease it. "Was he happy?" he asked. Janelle turned her eyes to him, full of truth. Yes, he was tired and stressed and scared, but he was happy. Grant nodded, though it made something inside him hurt worse. Calvin stirred again. Janelle adjusted him gently. His little fist reached out and, for just a second, brushed against Grant's wrist. The touch was so soft, so effortless, it hit Grant like a brick. He looked down at the baby's hand, small, fragile, but alive. Alive. He reached out slowly, unsure of what he was doing, and let his index finger brush Calvin's knuckles. The baby grabbed it without hesitation. No questions, no judgment. Grant's eyes glistened, but he blinked it back. "He doesn't know who I am," Grant murmured. "No," Janelle said, "but that could change." He looked at her, really looked. She wasn't asking for money. Not once had she hinted at it. She just wanted Marcus to be remembered, wanted Calvin to be acknowledged. "I wasn't there for Marcus," he said, voice cracking for the first time. "Not really. I don't know how to be here for him." She studied him for a moment. "You don't have to know how. You just have to show up." Those 5 words didn't sound like much, but they landed like a revelation. He looked back down at the baby still clutching his finger. Maybe it wasn't too late to show up, but just when Grant began to let his guard down, something Janelle said next would strike deeper than anything yet, because it would force him to confront not just what he lost, but what he'd failed to protect. "He was driving back from Columbus that night," Janelle said softly. Grant looked up from the baby, confused. "What?" "The night he died. He was coming home from Columbus. He had just dropped off the lease paperwork for our apartment." Grant blinked. "I thought he was visiting friends." She shook her head. "No, he was finalizing things for the move. He was coming back to surprise me." Grant sat back slowly, the full weight of that detail settling into his chest like concrete. "He had a little stuffed giraffe in the back seat," she continued, voice trembling now. "He picked it up for Calvin, said it reminded him of this toy he had as a kid. That's why he left so late. He stopped on the way home just to buy it." She reached into the diaper bag and pulled it out, a small tan giraffe with crooked stitching. One of the ears was slightly bent. "They found it next to him in the car." Grant stared at it, stunned. The damn giraffe. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the grass. "He died doing something good," she whispered. "Something kind." That's what broke him. Right there, in the middle of that gray cemetery in Toledo, Grant Ellison's armor cracked. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he let it go. "I thought I had more time," he said. "I thought I had time to fix things with him." His voice caught. He rubbed at his face, but this time he didn't pretend it was just the wind. "I used to check the news every morning to see if he'd finally made something of himself," he muttered. "I was waiting for a headline, something I could be proud of." Janelle said nothing. "I missed everything," he added. "I missed who he really was." He looked over at her, his eyes red. "He was a good man, wasn't he?" She nodded, tears falling now. "The best I ever knew. And I never told him," Grant said, barely able to get the words out. "I never once told him I was proud of him." Silence. Not empty silence, heavy silence. "You still can," she said gently. "He's right here." She gestured to the headstone, then to Calvin. "And here." Grant looked at Calvin again, who was now sleeping peacefully against her chest. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, totally unaware of the pain hovering in the air around him. "I didn't think I'd be a grandfather yet," Grant said, the corner of his mouth twitching into something like a smile. "Not like this." "No one plans for this," Janelle replied. They sat there for a while, just breathing. Then Grant said something he hadn't planned on saying. "I don't want him to grow up thinking I'm a stranger." Janelle looked at him, surprised. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to know him," Grant said. "If you'll let me." She stared at him for a long moment, not answering right away, her face unreadable. "You're not just saying this because you feel guilty, are you?" she asked. "Because guilt fades, and I can't have people walking in and out of his life when it's convenient." Grant didn't flinch this time. No, I don't want to walk in and out. I want to stay. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. My assistant's number is on the back. I'll give you mine too, if that's better. But I want to be there for him. Diapers, doctor visits, whatever you'll allow. Janelle didn't say anything right away. Instead, she handed him the giraffe. You hold on to it, she said. It's yours now. Grant took it, fingers trembling slightly. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a CEO. He didn't feel like a man who built half the skyline of Cleveland. He just felt like a man who had lost a son, and maybe, just maybe, was finding something worth holding on to. But Janelle still wasn't sure if she could trust him. And the next conversation would test whether Grant's offer was real or just another promise meant to make grief easier to bear. The cemetery had emptied out. A slow drizzle had begun to fall, just enough to speckle the pavement and darken the soil around Marcus's grave. Janelle pulled Calvin's blanket up higher over his little face, shielding him from the cold. He squirmed, but stayed asleep. You want to walk? She asked suddenly. Grant blinked. Now? Yeah, just around, she said. He always liked walking after it rained. Said it made the air feel cleaner. Grant stood slowly. His knees cracked as he straightened, reminding him he wasn't as young as he liked to pretend, but he nodded. They left the bench and began a slow walk along the narrow cemetery path. Janelle clutched the baby close, while Grant held the little giraffe awkwardly in one hand, unsure what to do with it, but not willing to let go. For a while, they didn't speak. The only sound was the soft crunch of their steps on the damp gravel. Then she asked, "What were you like with him when he was a kid?" Grant stared straight ahead. Strict. She smirked. I guessed that. He chuckled softly. He was always asking questions, always building things. Legos, cardboard cities, pillow forts that took over the whole living room. He'd get lost in it for hours. Sounds like him. But I kept telling him to stop wasting time. Told him life didn't reward dreamers. She looked over at him. What does it reward then? He thought for a moment. Planners? Fighters? People who know how to win. You think Marcus wanted to win? No, Grant admitted. I think he wanted to be free. They walked a little farther. I used to think money was the answer to everything, Grant said. That if I gave him opportunities, he'd thank me one day. But he didn't want what I was offering. Janelle stopped walking, turned to face him. He didn't hate you, you know, even when he was frustrated. Grant looked at her. He used to say, I know he means well. He just doesn't know how to show it, she continued. He loved you. He just didn't know how to reach you. That hit harder than he expected. Grant rubbed the bridge of his nose. I was a better businessman than a father. Still am. Then maybe it's time to learn something new, she said quietly. They started walking again. The drizzle faded into mist. You're not what I expected, he said finally. Neither are you. She smiled just a little, more tired than happy, but still, it was something. They stopped near a large oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. Calvin stirred again. This time, Janelle looked down and whispered, You hungry again, little man? She turned to Grant. You mind holding him for a second while I fix his bottle? His body stiffened. Me? Yes, you, she smiled. You're his grandfather, aren't you? Grant hesitated, unsure what to do with his hands, but she stepped closer and gently placed the baby into his arms. Calvin was warm, small, a little heavier than Grant expected. He held him like someone might hold a ticking clock, carefully, with fear that one wrong move might break everything. But Calvin didn't cry, just blinked up at him with soft, curious eyes. And in that moment, Grant felt something shift, not like a light switch, more like a weight being rearranged inside his chest. He's really mine, he murmured. Janelle was already prepping the bottle, but she heard it. Yeah, he really is. Grant looked down at the baby, who was still clutching that tiny fist. I never thought I'd get another shot at this, he said. You didn't, Janelle replied. This isn't a second shot at being a father. It's your first shot at being a grandfather. They're not the same. Grant looked at her, surprised by the honesty. But, she added, if you want to show up now, I'll give you that chance. He nodded, eyes never leaving Calvin's face. Thank you, he whispered. But while the moment felt peaceful, Janelle knew it would take more than a few quiet hours and a bottle to rebuild what Marcus never had. And she needed to ask Grant one more question before she could trust him completely. Janelle handed Grant the bottle, tilted a little, not too much. Let him take his time. Grant followed her instructions, unsure but trying. Calvin latched on, suckling peacefully, his tiny fingers wrapped loosely around the edge of Grant's sleeve. "He trusts you," she said. Grant didn't respond right away. He was too focused on the feeling of that tiny hand, the quiet sound of the baby drinking, the weight of everything he'd missed, and everything he still might have. Then Janelle said it. "I have one question before we leave." Grant looked up, heart kicking a little harder in his chest. "Go ahead." "If Marcus were still here, and he told you about me and Calvin, would you have accepted it?" she asked. "Or would you have walked away?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I want to say yes, but I've spent so many years building a version of the world that fit my rules. And Marcus, he broke every one of them." She waited. "I might have fought it," he continued, "but I think eventually I would have come around, because seeing him happy, really happy, was all I ever wanted. I just didn't know how to recognize it." She nodded slowly, looking down at Calvin. "That's fair." "I didn't love him the way he needed," Grant added. "But I did love him." "You still do," she said. He swallowed. "I never said it enough." "You can say it now," she said softly. Grant looked down at Calvin and whispered, "Your daddy was a better man than I ever gave him credit for, and I'm going to make sure you know that." The baby blinked up at him, the bottle slipping from his mouth. He yawned and nuzzled against Grant's chest, tiny breath warm against his coat. "I don't have a perfect plan," Grant said. "I don't know if I'll be good at this, but I'm willing to learn. I want to be there. For him. For you, if you'll let me." Janelle's guard lowered, not completely, but enough. "All right," she said. "We'll take it one step at a time." Grant smiled, gently rocking Calvin. "I'll take that." They stood there under the oak tree as the sky began to clear. Not bright sunshine, just a soft gray light, like the day was exhaling. Janelle looked at the headstone one last time. "I told him I'd raise this baby with love, no matter what," she said, "but I never imagined I wouldn't be doing it with him." Grant stepped beside her. "You're not alone anymore." She glanced at him. "I hope not." They started walking back toward the car, slowly, and for once, Grant didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like someone trying, really trying, to make peace with it. Maybe he couldn't go back and fix what was broken, but he could start again. He could show up. He could build something real. Even if it was just one bottle, one bedtime story, one Sunday visit at a time. Because sometimes, second chances don't come in grand gestures. They come in quiet moments, like a baby's breath against your chest, and a woman offering space to grow. Life doesn't always give you the closure you think you want. Sometimes it gives you the truth. And what you do with that truth, that's what defines who you really are. If there's someone you've shut out, someone you've misunderstood, someone you've never really seen, don't wait until it's too late. Say what needs to be said. Do what needs to be done. Before you're left standing at a grave, wondering what could have been. Make the call. Show up. Try. Because love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real.